Lieutenant Kaden Rook wiped the sweat from his brow, the taste of battle still lingering in his mouth. The stench of burned ozone and charred flesh seemed to cling to him as if it were a second skin. He'd just come from the front lines, the latest in a long line of brutal campaigns fought under the banner of the Xandorian Dominion. His mission had been successful, at least in the eyes of his superiors, but as he made his way to the briefing room, Kaden felt the familiar stirrings of doubt that had been growing inside him for months. Another one, he muttered to himself, adjusting the straps of his armor. He had seen enough destruction to last a lifetime, but it was the aftermath that haunted him, the innocent lives caught in the crossfire, the families displaced, the planets crushed under the Empire's iron heel. When he reached the briefing room, Kaden stepped inside with a practiced air of confidence, though his body was still tense from the battles he'd fought. The room was sterile, a cold, metal chamber lined with holographic screens that flickered and hummed. The air was heavy with the weight of countless meetings just like this one, briefings, debriefings, and orders handed down from on high. At the center of the room, a lone hologram flickered to life. The figure was tiny, barely a foot tall, but her presence was undeniable. Her dark, calculating eyes locked onto Kaden immediately, and despite her size, he felt a chill crawl down his spine. "Lieutenant Kaden Rook," the hologram said, her voice sharp and confident. "Congratulations. I've been briefed on your recent success in the Trios system." "Well done." Kaden blinked, momentarily thrown off guard. He had been expecting a formal debrief from one of his superiors, maybe General Sabek or Commander Drax. Instead, he found himself facing a child-sized figure with an icy demeanor. He straightened, trying to mask his confusion. "Who are you?" The hologram didn't flinch. "Governor Wyllis Taren," she said, her tone cutting through the air with the precision of a blade. "And I'm your new commanding officer. You'll be reporting to me from now on. I trust you're up for the task." Kaden's mind scrambled for a response. She was a governor. But she was so small. The Dominion's upper echelons weren't exactly known for appointing figures of such diminutive stature to high positions. "Governor," he repeated, his voice flat, disbelief creeping into his words. You're the one in charge?" The hologram didn't respond to his tone, but her eyes narrowed, and her lips curled into something between a smile and a snarl. "I'm more than capable, Lieutenant. You'll learn that soon enough. Now, pack your things. You're being reassigned to the Xalaris front. We've got a system to pacify. And you'll be under my command." Kaden felt a knot form in his stomach. Xalaris. A hotbed of resistance, filled with insurgents who had fought the Empire tooth and nail for decades. The mission was crucial, no question. But the thought of reporting to someone so unassuming felt wrong. Still, duty was duty. He had no choice. "Understood, Governor. When do we leave?" "Immediately," she replied, her voice smooth. "Get ready, Lieutenant. The Dominion doesn't wait for anyone. Especially not for those who can't keep up." The hologram flickered and was gone. Kaden stood still for a moment, staring at the empty space where Wyllis Taren had just been. He couldn't shake the feeling that something about this situation wasn't right. He shook his head, pushing the thought aside. He had a mission to complete. The flight to Xalaris was long and uneventful. Kaden spent most of the time staring out the viewport, watching the endless void of space stretch out before him. His mind wandered, replaying the conversation with Wyllis Taren over and over. The way she'd spoken, calm, self-assured, almost too calm for someone so young, so small. Was this some kind of joke? Was the Dominion trying to test him, to see how well he could function under absurd circumstances? When they finally arrived in the Xalaris system, Kaden's doubts began to solidify. The planet below them was a mess. A place of constant war, torn between factions of local militias and the Empire's grip. As the shuttle broke through the atmosphere, the violent bursts of anti-air fire flared up from the surface, a reminder of the resistance that held its ground. They landed in the heart of the Empire's outpost on the planet, a towering base of steel and concrete nestled in the mountains of the northern hemisphere. The scent of the air was thick with pollution, and the ground below was cracked and barren, scarred by years of combat. As Kaden stepped off the shuttle, a familiar figure approached, a tall, broad-shouldered officer with a scowl that matched the dismal surroundings. He snapped a salute as Kaden stepped forward, his boots clanging on the metal platform. "Lieutenant Rook, I'm Captain Vaughn. Governor Taren's orders are clear. The resistance has been growing more organized in this sector, and we need every hand on deck." "I'm aware of the situation," Kaden replied, his voice tight. "Where's Governor Taren?" The captain hesitated. "She'll be here soon." "I suggest you prepare yourself, sir. She has a particular way of doing things." Kaden frowned, but before he could question the captain further, a soft, almost imperceptible hum filled the air. Out of the shadows emerged a figure, no taller than a child, walking with the kind of authority that made even the grizzled soldiers pause. Wyllis Taren. She wasn't a child. Not in the way he'd initially thought. Her eyes were sharp, cold, and calculating. She surveyed him for a moment before speaking, her voice steady. "Lieutenant Rook," she said, her gaze never leaving him. "I trust the journey was uneventful." Kaden, trying to mask his surprise, stood at attention. "Governor Taren. It's an honor to meet you." Her lips curled into that same tight smile. "The honor is mine, Lieutenant. You're about to learn that size means very little when it comes to power. And I intend to teach you exactly how much the Dominion is willing to sacrifice to maintain its control. Are you ready for that?" Kaden swallowed, his confidence wavering for the briefest moment. He nodded, determined not to show weakness. "I'm ready." Wyllis' eyes gleamed with something that could have been amusement, but it wasn't. She turned on her heel, motioning for him to follow. "Good. Let's get to work." Kaden had no idea just how much work was ahead. Kaden couldn't shake the feeling that everything about his new assignment was off. The atmosphere on Xalaris was tense, more than he'd expected. The Dominion's outpost was on edge, the soldiers moving with a practiced wariness, their gazes constantly flickering to the horizon, where the planet's smoldering cities barely had time to cool before another conflict ignited. Wyllis Taren was everywhere, and nowhere. Her presence hung in the air, unspoken but undeniably felt. She didn't work from a central command room like most governors. Instead, she moved with military precision, coordinating through encrypted channels and dispatching orders with ruthless efficiency. It was in every corner of the base, the whispers in the hallways, the taut nerves of the soldiers, the feeling that they were on the verge of something massive, something dangerous. Kaden, who had always prided himself on knowing how to handle command under fire, was now acutely aware of his unease around her methods. She never appeared flustered, never seemed to need the usual pomp or ceremony of power. Instead, she worked in the shadows, running the operation from behind closed doors. The others? They only got scraps of her plans. That morning, as Kaden made his way to the makeshift operations center, located in a bunker beneath the compound, he found Captain Vaughn pacing near the entrance. The man looked more harried than usual, his broad shoulders hunched, his face pinched with frustration. "Captain?" Kaden asked, his voice cutting through the tension. Vaughn barely looked up, a sigh escaping him. "You're going to hate this, Lieutenant. Governor Taren, she's doing things differently." Kaden folded his arms. "Differently? How?" Vaughn finally met his eyes. "She's unpredictable. The way she's handling the insurgents, it's not what we're used to. Most commanders would flatten the resistance in a matter of days, but she's being subtle. Calculating. Every move she makes leaves them thinking they have the upper hand, then she strikes with precision. It's unnerving. And it's working." Kaden didn't respond immediately. There was something chilling in Vaughn's voice. A lack of certainty. It wasn't fear exactly, but something close. He hadn't expected to find the resistance on Xalaris so entrenched, so organized, but he also hadn't expected to be working under a governor with such an unorthodox approach. Before he could probe further, a voice rang out behind them. It was sharp, cool, like a blade being drawn from its sheath. "Gentlemen, I trust the pleasantries are over. Kaden turned to see Wyllis Taren standing a few feet away, her posture impeccable. She was smaller than he'd ever imagined in person, but her presence more than made up for the size discrepancy. Her eyes gleamed as she surveyed the two men before her. "Governor," Kaden said, stepping forward, "what's the plan for today?" Wyllis' lips curled into that slight, unnerving smile. "The plan? You want a plan, Lieutenant? We are going to continue destabilizing the insurgents, but we're going to do it differently. No more head-on confrontations. This isn't about brute force, it's about manipulation." Kaden furrowed his brow. "Manipulation?" "Yes," she said, nodding. "We let them think they have a chance, that they've somehow outsmarted us. Then, when their guard is down, we strike. Their strategy is predicated on us being predictable. We're going to show them that we're anything but." Captain Vaughn shifted uncomfortably. "But Governor, isn't this..." "Isn't this what?" she interrupted, her eyes narrowing at Vaughn's hesitation. "You think I don't know how to crush a rebellion, Captain? I've been doing it my whole life. The difference now is that I'm playing a longer game." Kaden caught the subtle hint of impatience in Wyllis' tone, and it was almost enough to make him step back. But the sense of foreboding he'd felt earlier was growing clearer. This wasn't just about the mission. This wasn't about crushing a group of insurgents. Wyllis was aiming for something bigger, something more. "What are you really after?" Kaden asked, his voice barely above a whisper, but heavy with the weight of the question. "What's the endgame here?" Her gaze flickered briefly toward him, a sharp glint in her eyes. It was almost as if she were sizing him up. "You'll see soon enough, Lieutenant." Before Kaden could press further, Wyllis turned sharply on her heel and walked toward a nearby comms terminal, her steps light but firm. "Vaughn, you'll prepare the next phase. I want minimal contact with the insurgents until the trap is set. Kaden, you're with me." Kaden hesitated, then followed her without a word. The sense of unease in his gut continued to gnaw at him, but there was no room for hesitation here. Not with her. Not with the way she commanded every room she entered. The following hours passed in a blur of surveillance data, coded transmissions, and tactical simulations. Kaden felt like a cog in a much larger machine, running on a schedule that was as relentless as it was precise. Wyllis' cold, calculated approach was starting to make sense. She was building something, layer by layer, slowly dismantling the insurgents' confidence before closing in for the final strike. At the heart of it all, Kaden couldn't help but admire the sheer brilliance of her strategy. She didn't waste resources. She didn't waste time. Everything was meticulously calculated, every move deliberate. And yet, there was an undercurrent of something unsettling, an almost personal element to the way she carried herself. As if the rebellion wasn't just a political battle, but something deeply personal to her. It was during a lull in the action that Kaden found himself in a small command tent, reviewing data on the insurgent movements when he was joined by Wyllis. She didn't knock, just stepped inside with that same cool composure that seemed to infuriate everyone else. "We're ready for phase 1, she said, her eyes scanning the data with a practiced air of indifference. "I trust you're prepared for what's coming, Lieutenant." Kaden turned his chair to face her, meeting her gaze. "I'm ready. But I have to ask, why do it this way? Why not just crush them like we usually do?" Wyllis tilted her head, as if considering him for the first time. "Because, Lieutenant, they're not just rebels. They're a symbol. And if we crush them too quickly, we make martyrs. That only fans the flames. We need them to think they can win. Only then will we have them exactly where we want them." Kaden's eyes narrowed. "And where is that?" Wyllis' smile was thin, almost predatory. "In the position of surrender, of course. But only after they've fallen far enough to know there's no way out." The chill in her voice left no room for misinterpretation. She wasn't just playing a game of military strategy. She was playing for keeps. And Kaden wasn't entirely sure which side he was on anymore. As the day wore on, the tension around them mounted. Kaden had seen plenty of battles before, but this felt different. Wyllis wasn't just breaking the insurgents' backs. She was breaking something inside him, too. He couldn't tell whether it was her brilliance or her cruelty that unsettled him more, but as the final pieces of the plan fell into place, Kaden knew one thing for sure: he was in the middle of something much larger than he had anticipated. And whether he liked it or not, Wyllis Taren was the one pulling the strings. Kaden stood in the dimly lit operations room, the glow of the holographic maps flickering in front of him. His eyes traced the insurgent movements across the Xalaris system, carefully mapped, precise. His fingers hovered over the comms panel, but he didn't make a move to activate it. The calm before the storm always felt this way, heavy, suffocating. He couldn't escape the feeling that something was about to change, something beyond the battlefield. "Lieutenant," Wyllis' voice broke through his thoughts, cold and sharp as ever. She stepped into the room, her small frame almost blending into the shadows. Yet her presence was unmistakable, like a predator waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Kaden turned, his mind still unsettled from the long hours of waiting, planning, and executing small-scale strikes. It had been weeks since he'd joined her campaign on Xalaris, and in that time, he'd witnessed her methods firsthand: cold, calculated, and relentless. What had started as a way to contain the insurgents had evolved into something else, a masterful game of psychological warfare. Wyllis moved closer, her eyes scanning the maps on the wall. "You're nervous," she remarked, her tone so matter-of-fact that it almost felt like an accusation. "I'm not nervous," Kaden replied, his voice measured. "I'm unsure." Wyllis tilted her head slightly, as if intrigued by his admission. "Of what?" He hesitated. It wasn't easy to admit, but the weight of his unease was growing. "Of you. Of this whole operation. The way you're handling the insurgents. It's not like any campaign I've ever seen. You're toying with them." Her lips curled into a small, almost imperceptible smile. "You're not the first to think that, Lieutenant. But you're also not seeing the bigger picture. The game is not just about crushing them. It's about breaking them. And then, we'll rebuild. But only after they've lost everything." Kaden felt a shiver run down his spine. The coldness in her voice made it clear that her vision extended far beyond the conventional military tactics he had grown accustomed to. This wasn't about victory, it was about domination. He opened his mouth to argue, but she silenced him with a raised hand. "Enough talk. We've reached the final phase. You'll understand soon enough." The cold finality in her voice made Kaden's pulse quicken. This was the moment. The moment he'd been dreading. He hadn't expected the resistance to collapse this quickly, but now he realized this was the trap. A trap designed with patience and precision. And he was caught in it. The mission briefing came in the late hours of the night, an encrypted transmission relayed directly to the command center. Kaden joined Wyllis and Captain Vaughn in the war room, the tension palpable. Vaughn's face was grim, his brows furrowed in concern. "It's time," Wyllis announced, voice low, but steady. She wasn't one for ceremonial speeches. The room was already filled with the sharp hum of anticipation as the final pieces of their plan were set into motion. Kaden studied the plan laid out before him. It was deceptively simple, but he knew better than to underestimate it. A series of coordinated strikes on key insurgent positions. The goal wasn't to decimate them outright but to make them feel as if they were winning, just enough to lure them in. "Phase 1 is complete," Wyllis continued, gesturing to the map. "We've drawn them into the trap. They believe they're winning. They've spread themselves too thin." "Then what?" Kaden asked, his voice cutting through the silence. Wyllis met his gaze, her expression unreadable. "Then we'll take it all back in one fell swoop." It was all starting to come together, but Kaden couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something about this didn't sit right. He'd seen battles before, had fought in wars where tactical brilliance was necessary. But this wasn't just about winning, this was about making the enemy believe they could win, only to snatch that victory away when they were most vulnerable. The next few hours passed in a blur of activity. Communications were established, units were positioned, and the final phases of the plan went into motion. Kaden followed his orders as if he were on autopilot, no questions, No hesitation. But as he watched the holographic maps update, tracking the movements of insurgent forces, he couldn't help but feel the weight of the decision he'd made by following her. Hours later, the trap was sprung. Kaden stood at the center of the command room, watching as the first waves of insurgents began to move into the designated kill zones. They were reacting, just as planned, too confident, too eager to claim victory. Their forces had divided, leaving them vulnerable. And Wyllis' forces, lying in wait, had already positioned themselves to strike. Kaden's heart thudded in his chest as the first wave of explosions rocked the landscape below. The insurgents were ambushed, overwhelmed by a sudden and ferocious onslaught from all sides. The precision was unnerving. Every move felt like it had been choreographed weeks in advance. Every strike, every ambush, was executed with ruthless efficiency. It was exactly what Wyllis had promised, a surgical strike. Phase 2 was in full effect, Wyllis announced, her voice cool, almost detached as she observed the chaos unfold. This is the beginning of the end for them. Kaden's gaze didn't leave the screen, watching as the insurgents scrambled to respond, trying to mount a defense. But there was no defense against the scale of what Wyllis had unleashed. The entire resistance had been funneled into a box, and now they were trapped. He couldn't deny it anymore, Wyllis had played them. She'd played him, too. A voice broke through the tense silence. "Governor, we've got a situation on the east flank," Captain Vaughn said, his expression tight with urgency. "A secondary resistance cell has broken through our perimeter." Wyllis didn't blink. "Contain them. If they think they have an escape route, they'll regroup. Keep them engaged until we can finish the rest." Kaden couldn't help but feel the creeping unease in his gut. This wasn't a battle anymore. It was a massacre. As the insurgents' final pockets of resistance crumbled, Kaden felt a strange sense of disconnect. He was a soldier. He was here to follow orders, to win the war. But this wasn't victory. It was something else. It felt wrong. "Governor," Kaden said, his voice quieter than he intended, "this isn't just about the insurgents, is it?" Wyllis glanced over at him, her cold gaze locking onto his. "No, Lieutenant. This is about control. About sending a message." She paused for a beat, letting the words sink in before adding, "And you're part of that message." Kaden swallowed hard, the weight of her words pressing down on him. She was right. He was part of something far larger than he had understood. The question now wasn't whether the insurgents would fall, it was what would be left standing when the dust settled. And Kaden wasn't sure he liked the answer. The last insurgent forces were mopped up quickly. The planet, once on the brink of rebellion, now lay under the firm grip of the Dominion. But as Kaden stood on the balcony overlooking the shattered city below, he couldn't shake the feeling that something had been lost in the process. Wyllis joined him shortly, her presence as undeniable as ever. "Phase 3 begins now," she said, her voice as calm as if they were discussing the weather. "We rebuild. We prepare for the next phase." Kaden glanced at her, then down at the wreckage below. "And what comes next, Governor?" Wyllis' smile was sharp and dangerous. "Next? We conquer. Everything. And everyone." Kaden turned away, his thoughts a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. He had followed her commands, but now, standing amidst the ruins, he realized just how far he'd gone down this path. And he wasn't sure where it would lead.